Hey, everybody. Well, welcome to today's webinar, Selecting Your Next Business Phone System. My name is Ryan Emmerich. I serve as one of the client experience and account management contacts here at Kite Technology Group. And joining us for today's session is Jason Goebel. He's our Kite Technology's Chief Solution Officer and the main presenter today. We're really glad you've chosen to take some time and look at some phone system options together and how they can impact your business. I know Jason has a lot of great information in store and excited to share that with you. For those who are joining us who are maybe not familiar with Kite Technology Group, we are a full managed services IT provider and consulting for business. We've been around about 30 years now, helping clients in the small business space, insurance agencies, legal, nonprofits, a whole different bunch of verticals that we can interact with and just help leverage technology to improve your business efficiency, as well as security. We work with businesses in a lot of different industries, and we would really love to connect and provide just consultation and a future talking point for maybe how we could help your team become more efficient and successful in the future using technology. We'll be sure to reach out after the webinar if you just kind of drop us a link in the after survey, and we'd love to get connected there. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Jason, and he'll go ahead and introduce himself and some of the presentation today.
Thanks, Ryan. So welcome to the webinar. My name is Jason Goebel. I am Chief Solutions Officer, Chief Technology Officer over here at KiteTech. I'm just shy of 20 years doing this thing. My whole career's pretty much been insurance focused in the IT space. I do have an Arizona property and casualty license, but my claim to fame are my IT skills. I am a national and regional conference presenter. Hopefully, I will see some of you guys at Applied Net next week. We'll be on stage having a good time. So, today's agenda. So you want to buy a phone system. Okay. Well, we're going to start with why. Then we're going to dive in a little bit to the anatomy of a phone system. Phone system 101. I'll give you a kind of a crash course in the parts, the key features to consider. And I guess the rest of the presentation could be like a psychological experiment, because we're going to talk about where you are. We're going to talk about what you want to be when you grow up, and how do you get there. So let's start with a poll question. What kind of phone systems do you guys currently have? Are they in the cloud? Are they in the building? Do you even know? Ryan, if you could launch that poll, we'll start getting some answers here. I think that'll help us. The purpose of this question is really to kind of fine tune some of the content that comes later. If most of you guys are in the cloud, we can kind of do some deep dive on some other things. If most are on premise, that'll at least allow me to know what kind of key fundamentals I need to really strike at and strike hard. So just looking at the phones, looking at the poll now, wow, 71% are still in the building, 24% cloud hosted. That's nobody said they don't know. That's awesome. I was hoping for at least one person to be like, I don't know, that just rings and it's magic.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, guys, for responding. I think we have another question as well.
We do. We have one more question.
Launch that one here. Okay.
Why did you show up today? What's the number one reason that has you considering buying a new phone system? I can tell you, if 71% of you are in the building, as COVID came and went and lockdown protocols and remote work and working from your couch and all that stuff came to be, you probably found that you have some pretty significant limitations when you're tied to that building. And we're going to talk an awful lot about that today. So, yep, I'm seeing the polls right now, right on 50% of you are saying you need a phone system that works well for remote work. That's a pretty common thing. 33% are citing service and support issues. And 28% old phone system is lacking in features. And that's true. The old phone systems, man, they were super reliable. But they did three things. They did three things well. And we're finding that we just need it to do a lot more.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
And there's probably reasons
total
that aren't even on this list. So I'm going to end the poll now, but thanks guys for participating. That's great.
Yeah, 52% need a phone system that works well for remote work. Yep, that is true. I am going to get these slides advancing sooner or later. Okay, so let's start with why. We did our poll. 52% of you, you're here because you need a phone system that works well in remote situations. 24% lacking features. Some of you are looking for a cost-effective solution. 29% final total, not getting the support you need. Yep, all of those make sense, not surprising at all. So, why are we here? Well, we've always taken a if it ain't broke kind of mindset to our phone systems. They've always been very reliable, and they've been reliable to a fault. Sometimes we've kept them around for 5 years. Sometimes we've kept around for 10 or 15. I frequently encounter businesses who have phone systems to which parts simply don't exist anymore. So as pieces start to fall off, they just kind of make do. So the phone system hasn't changed as much as the rest of our technology. I mean, it would be unthinkable to keep the same cell phone for more than 48 months, let alone 5 years or 10 years. So new tools have come along, new integrations. We all moved to Microsoft 365. We all went home to work from our couches. We're using Teams, we're using Slack, we're using chat. A lot of new features, a lot of new integrations, CRMs have come to pass that don't integrate with an older phone system. And work has fundamentally changed. We don't typically work from offices anymore. And even when we do, sometimes that's only because of a choice. The new hires that we're bringing in, they expect that we're going to have some kind of a hybrid or work from home option for them. And we're doing more with offshore teams now than we ever have. Resource Pro, Patra, all processing teams based out of India. So more and more they need to integrate into our systems, into our processes, and having a phone system that can pull that off is really critical. And even our customers have changed. It's not about the phone call anymore, oddly, that we're talking about phone systems, but it's about text, it's about Facebook Messenger, it's about Instagram, chat bots. If you've got a live answer agent on your website, all of these things have to be considered when you're talking about communication. So, phone system 101, let's talk about what makes up the actual, when we talk about a phone system or a phone solution, what does that actually mean? Well, you can kind of break it down into three fundamental parts. Right there in the middle, you got the system. Used to call it the PBX, the private branch exchange, but that's the brains of the operation. The calls come in, it routes the calls, it knows if you're open, it knows if you're closed, it knows if you're forwarding to your cell phone, do not disturb. That's the brains of the operation. We also have the endpoints. We used to call them a phone, a telephone, a handset. And we call them endpoints now because they don't always take a physical form. I mean, yeah, you can still have a phone on your desk, but you might actually have a soft phone on your computer or your laptop. Might be an app on your phone. Might be all three at the same time. And then you've got dial tone. It's what we used to call the phone line. You still need to connect to the outside world, and that's how your dial tone gets it done. So while the actual copper lines might have changed, we still need dial tone. We still need that connected service. So let's talk about the system, the brains of the operation. It can come in a couple of different flavors. For a lot of you, it's on premise. It's still in the building, and that can be physical hardware. It can also be a virtual machine. You can also have a hosted system. They can be public cloud like Amazon, Azure, or Google. Ours is hosted in Amazon. We have some clients that host in Azure, but it can also be private cloud. You might have a relationship with a telecom vendor and they host it in their office, or they host it in their data center. They might even host it in their version of their public cloud. And then you've got what we would call as a service systems. Those would be the Ring Centrals, the 8x8s, the Nextivas of the world. They're kind of black box. We don't really know how they were put together, and we certainly can't take them apart. We buy the whole thing as a service, and it just works. Hopefully works well. But you can't say, oh, I'm in Virginia, I'd really like my phone system to be in Virginia, or I'm in Florida, I really want my phone system to not be in Florida. You don't always get that kind of option with an as a service solution. You get what they bring to the table. So now you got your endpoints. You got your handsets. They can be desk phones. They can be conference room phones. They still make wireless phones with little antennas. Those still exist. You got soft phones for your Windows, for Mac. Of course, with those guys, you get USB headsets. Sometimes you get some Bluetooth headsets. And you got mobile apps. They support iOS. They support Android. The cool thing about these is they have Bluetooth support. So if you've got something, fancy like your Google Pixel noise canceling, super awesome things, they can pair to your mobile phone and they can become your headset. So stuff like that's pretty nice. And you got the dial tone. So used to be, it was analog, what we call a POTS line, plain old telephone system. You paid per line. It was very old technology. It's been around for a long time. And it was on premise only. Analog lines are starting to be retired and being replaced with a digital version of the same thing. We call them an ATA, analog telephone adapter. So if you've got Comcast service, for example, they will deliver to you a box that goes on the wall. And on the outside, it's a digital system, but on the inside, it replicates those old style telephone connectors. And the larger systems, we would have PRI circuits. They kind of replaced their P1s, digital version of that. Usually those got purchased with a block of minutes. Sometimes you could do a flat rate. They were pretty expensive, pretty difficult to install. And as a result, they tend to come with multi-year contracts. You could get 1 year, but you would be paying for installation costs and stuff, which would be quite a lot. You can get those on premise. You can actually get those on co-location services as well. So if you've got a telecom vendor who runs a data center, they might have PRI circuits on the back end. Very reliable, but very expensive. And last, we have SIP trunks, session initiated protocol. So SIP trunks, they're very flexible. You can buy them per minute. You can buy them per concurrent call. If you've got 50 people, but very few are often on the phone, you can get a 50 user phone system, but only have 2 or 3 concurrent calls and pay for that. So there's a lot of opportunity to save money with SIP trunks. Some have faxing support built in, a protocol called T38. Some do not. So that's an important piece to consider when you're putting these things together. So now that we know the meat and potatoes of what a phone system is, let's talk about some key features. Some that may or may not exist, and you might be surprised. So we got some key features centered around flexibility. You've got hot desking and hoteling, which if you have a physical phone and maybe you don't have the same desk that you used to have, maybe you need to work, maybe you share desks, maybe it's a common space. Hot desk or hoteling, it's called different things on different platforms, gets you the ability to walk up to any physical phone, put in your code, And then that phone becomes your extension. So all your calls now come to that phone. If I wanted to work in the other office, I would just walk into the other office, put in my code, and then that physical phone would become me. So my identity kind of follows around the physical phones. So some phone systems support it. Some do not. Some it's an add-on. So that's a key consideration. Remote handsets. There are systems that simply do not support a physical phone if it's not inside of your building. So that's important to know. If you're thinking you want to have folks work from home, but you don't want the hassle of the physical handsets, or maybe you do, that's a key consideration that needs to go into the conversation. So messaging, also what we call Omni Channel. I'm going to deep dive into that term Omni Channel in a bit. But you want some messaging flexibility, text messaging, MMS, picture messaging. Some phone systems do it, some don't. For some, it's an add-on feature, so that's important to know. Mobile apps, you'd think every phone system on the world would have a mobile app by now, but some do and some don't, and some are, I don't know how to say quite terrible without saying quite terrible, so I'll just say it. Some of them will leave you wanting more. So understanding what that mobile app experience looks like. Is it easy? Does it function well? Does the battery saver on your device turn it off every time you're not looking? Those will be important things to consider. And you've got options for web browsing, browser control. Can I get to my phone system and manage things from a web browser, or do I have to use a special version of an installed software? That becomes really important as you think about where you want to work and how you want to work. If you have to have very specific software installed on a workstation, that can be an issue because it's not flexible. It means that only certain people are going to be able to do that job. So that's an important thing to consider. They got some options in visibility as well. And as everybody's kind of worked from anywhere now, visibility and having to maintain it has become quite a challenge. I mean, I've got employees that I've never actually met in person, but I know what they're doing. I know where they work. Because we have things like presence and reporting and analytics, oftentimes these things come with an additional call package. Sometimes they call it a call center. Sometimes they call it other terms. But the ability to see who's logged in, who's not logged in, who can receive calls, who's on Do Not Disturb, and what that looks like. Historically, it's been on a key on your physical phone. If it was green, you could call that person. And if it was red, you knew you'd get voicemail. There's so much else going on now, specifically in terms of presence. Like right now, technically I'm in the office, but I'm unavailable because I'm doing a webinar. So, we need a status that says, yes, I'm here. No, I'm not available, but I will be back today. So we're starting to work those presence functionalities into our phone systems. So knowing what and how these things get done, what the limitations are, key things to consider. So you've got a receptionist console as well. Some phone systems have them, some don't. So if you have a live answer receptionist, if you have somebody who picks up calls, it'll be very important to understand how they're going to do that job on the new system. Some have great switchboards, some have consoles, some still very much rely on a physical phone being in place. Some do both at the same time. So definitely a key consideration there. So we're talking about phone systems, but when you go phone system shopping, you're going to hear a lot of things. You're going to hear terms like unified communication, UCaaS. So when you think about a phone system, you think about communicating. A phone call is a one-to-one conversation. Sometimes with a conference call, it's a 1 to 2 or a 1 to 3. But when it comes to one-to-many communications, can you intercom and page the whole office? Do you have overhead paging if you have a building? If you have more phone calls coming in than you have people to answer the phone, what does that look like? And of course, faxing, still very much a thing. So it's important to understand what types of one-to-many communication channels you have and how that's going to get done. Because a lot of phone systems do support them, but an awful lot don't. Intercomming, for example. These days, well, back in the day, that was how we talked to each other. We would, buzz into somebody's office. Hey, are you there? Can I come over? These days, we kind of see that as a privacy violation. Having a button that opens a microphone into somebody else's private space, maybe not the best idea. So you'll find phone systems that flat out cannot do intercomming, and they will cite privacy reasons as to why that feature was taken away. So understanding those things are going to be really important for you. And of course, quality and security. We just expect that these phone systems are going to be reliable, and every vendor out there is going to give you, SLA of 99.9999% uptime, and that's likely true. These systems still are very, very reliable, but the thing to consider here is that the vast majority of the types of communication we have don't happen in real time. So if I'm in Microsoft Teams and I'm chatting with Ryan, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, he's in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I'm typing and I can see the chat bubbles and I know he's there and I know he's responding and I'm waiting for it. You'd think that's real time, but from a technical perspective, it's not. If there's latency, if my internet's a little iffy today, if his internet goes out or blips or he reboots a router, I might not see that, and our communication won't be affected. Well, phone systems, voice in particular, happens in real time. You can't slow down the voice. So if you've got any latency on the lines, if you've got anything like that, while technically I'll tell you your phone system's up, it might be less than desirable. By now everybody's had a cell phone call that just didn't go well because you couldn't hear the person or they sounded like a robot or something like that. These are the types of quality issues that you need to be concerned about, because while everybody's going to tell you the phone system's going to be up, up's not good enough. We need to have really good call quality. We also need to have really good call recording. Oftentimes that's an add-on package. And even when it's an add-on package, it doesn't just go live immediately, because when you start recording calls, you have to take into consideration states with two-party consent notifications. So, you can program phone systems to make an announcement your call may be recorded for quality and training purposes. But sometimes you have to retrain your people when they answer the phone. Hi, this is Jason. I'm calling from a recorded line. How can I help you? So that's a key consideration. How are you going to pull that off? How are you going to make sure that your customers understand why you're doing it and what you're doing, and that you're really using it for the right purposes? Going back to those SIP trunks and things of that nature, you have a concept called secure SIP. It's an encrypted channel. It's an encrypted conversation. It's transparent to you and I, the people on the phone. But the phone system will be doing something to protect that. Not all phone systems do secure SIP, so it's important to ask that question. Curious that as I'm seeing a lot of cyber liability policy renewals with a lot of very strange and very pointed security questions. I've yet to see that one, but if I had a crystal ball, my crystal ball would tell me you can expect to see that question in the not too distant future. So very important to go ahead and plan for that future and make sure that we can do secure SIP on our voice over IP systems. Another often overlooked key consideration is a session border controller. Call them SBCs for short, but a session border controller is really, really important if you have a physical office. So if you got a physical office and you have 10 physical telephone calls, 10 physical telephones, those 10 phones have to maintain their individual connections to the phone system. And they have to do this, remember, in real time because voice can't slow down. So you can already imagine how difficult that can be. It's like juggling 10 different balls. Well, that's where the session border controller comes in. It's a little computer, custom built and custom programmed to work with your phone system, but it is local. So those 10 physical phones that are local, they now talk to one session border controller on site. And the session border controller is responsible for maintaining the connections. So rather than 10 phones all struggling to stay connected, you got that one connection. And then the 10 phones, they have a local resource. So it's a lot easier to keep that voice traffic going smoothly and in real time. Some systems, they demand session border controllers, others completely optional. Some don't even support it. So if you have a physical building, that's going to be a key consideration for you. So I just threw out an awful lot of key considerations. So I want to walk you through a couple of scenarios just to see how they really rise to the top, how the important things happen. So the scenario one, the one we all have to be considering, is working from home. So you got people that work from home. Maybe they're hybrid, they come in and out, but maybe they just work exclusively. This is how KiteTech does it these days. We do have a couple of people that hang out in the office, but for the vast majority of us, we work from home exclusively. So what we're going to do with handsets is important. Are they going to be remote? Are we going to use mobile apps? These are going to be key considerations for us. Obviously, security, that's a big thing. But when you work remotely, presence, reporting, analytics, these are all really important. If we didn't have good visibility into what our folks were doing, we would really struggle to make a determination of who was even available to answer calls at any given time. So scenario two, shared workspaces. Chances are, if you have an office, it's become a little bit like a free-for-all. We did the same thing with ours. We took a large office, we downsized it. We still have a lot of desks, but if you show up to work there and hang out, you might not get the same desk every time. So hot desking and hoteling is a pretty important feature. Call queues and agents so that I can log in, I can make myself available to the phone system and receiving calls. I can log out. Of course, with that shared workstation, that workspace, that session border controller really becomes important. And again, reporting and analytics. Do you have enough shared workspaces? Do you have too many? Knowing how they're being used and what you can report on is going to be pretty critical to answering that question, to make sure you got the right setup, you got the right square footage, and everything is working well. So scenario three, personal cell phones. Back in the day when cell phones were the shiny new thing, we were more than happy to use them for all of our communication. So all of our clients had our personal cell phone numbers and they would call us in the middle of the night, and it was still a new thing. So it wasn't a bad deal, right? Well, some of us have gotten a little weary, but for some of the new generation, they really value that work-life balance, and they like to turn their cell phones off at night. They like to disconnect. They don't want the interruptions. But the reality is that concept of using personal cell phones never really served our clients well. When you're trying to reach that one person, it makes a lot more sense to have a team. That way, if the one person isn't available, the clients can still get all the help they need. So it has always been a better service to the clients, to not give out that personal cell phone number. I know it feels good, makes people feel important, but from a getting stuff done kind of perspective, having things like mobile apps and browser control and presence and really helping the team to function as one does a much better job of serving the client's needs, because now you're never at the mercy of one person. If one person becomes available, the phone system can do great things to make sure that the client need is still met very easily. So last scenario 4, hi Florida, talking to you. Disaster recovery, when lightning strikes or when hurricanes come passing through. At some point in time, we're all going to have to figure out how we get to work when something has gone. Either the power's gone out, or the building's gone, or the internet's out, something like that. So hot desking and hoteling is really critical for physical environments so that you can work somewhere else if a power in a whole cubicle set goes down. Again, we go back to those call queuing and agents. The ability to have other people log in to take other people out of the queue and still get the phone calls answered. That's really important. And again, session border controllers. This is where they kind of go, now you're on the opposite end. I've talked about the session border controller being a really critical piece. But if it goes down and the building goes down, how do we get those phones reprogrammed to no longer use the session border controller? Things like that have to be considered. And of course, reporting and analytics. That's always going to be critical, understanding that, when we execute on a business continuity plan, is it working? Are the phone calls actually being answered? Recognizing that we're conceivably optimizing or operating not at our best. We're certainly impacted if we lose our building or if we lose our power or our internet. But understanding how these things roll out, very important. So how do we do all of this? Well, step 1, let's talk about where we are. Let's really understand the current state of things. First thing you need to consider is your office structure. You have one office, do you have multi-office? If you have an office structure, if you have a physical presence, it's going to have some cabling. Is it Cat 3? Is it Cat 5? Is it Cat 6? And you won't need to know exactly what those mean, but what you will need to know is Cat 3 doesn't work with a voice over IP phone system. You need Cat 5. You definitely need Cat 5E or 6 to have a really good time with it. Do the switches, do they support power over Ethernet? If they don't, you're going to need, power adapters for your phones. They don't always come included in the box anymore. So these are conversations you're going to have with that phone vendor, and be prepared to answer those questions. Probably going to need your IT guys to help answer those questions, but it goes a lot smoother if you know up front what you have in that office. So if your office structure is hybrid or flexible, you need to understand those key considerations. Knowing what people have at home for remote work is going to be really critical. Are they running on Wi-Fi? Do they have wired connections? Do they have the ability to run wired connections? Are they running DSL? Do they have satellite? Do they have something that's almost a non-starter in voice communication working from home? So getting a survey of what's in the building and getting a survey of what your folks have in terms of internet access at home and how they connect to that internet access is really important. So then, you need to understand the current state of how you answer phone calls. Do you have a receptionist? Do you need one? And can this person work from anywhere? Having that person with all the power, with all the flexibility is going to be really important. So if that's a critical need, we need to understand that now. Auto attendants and digital receptionists. Do you have one of those? If the receptionist is out of the office or goes to lunch, who picks up the slack? Do those phone calls go to other people, or do you have the system step in and handle overflow? And if it does, is it useful? Call yourself, listen to your prompts, count how many times you have to press 1 or 2 or 3, see if it's too much. Almost every time I go into an auto attendant on a current state phone system, I find a feature that is either broken or abandoned, or you press 3 and it goes nowhere. So understanding what the current state of things is going to be important. Are you using call queues? Are you using ring groups? Who's answering the calls? And what happens to the calls if there are more of them than there are people to answer? These are where your call queues and ring groups are going to come into play. Do you have them now? Do you have overflow groups? And specifically, what kind? You've got round robins, which will ring one phone at a time until it gets somebody. You've got ring all groups, which is the call comes in and 7 or 8 people that are in the group, their phone rings all the time. You've got some overflows where these 3 phones will ring first. And if no one answers, these 10 phones will ring next. So understanding the current state of how that happens is really important, because the ring group type that you use might be different on a new phone system. And you need to write down what your after hours expectations are. Do you have third parties that make phone calls on your behalf? Do you work with contractors? Do you forward phones over to an answering service, or do you use a general mailbox? Having these things written out in a current state is going to be really important. But wait, there's more. We're talking about phone systems, but what we're really talking about is communication. And that has sprawled way beyond the phone call. If you don't think you're text messaging right now, I can tell you you are. If you got a Salesforce, there are text messages on that phone talking about some sales business. So it's already happening. So, ask the question, how are we tracking them? How does that information get back so that we can take action, so that we can protect ourselves from errors and omissions? What does that kind of stuff look like? Facebook Messenger, do you have a mechanism to respond to clients? How are you tracking that information? And are you doing anything on your website? Are you using Podium, or are you using some other kind of a live chat service? Is it AI, or is it actual people typing things? Getting that written down is going to go a long way towards streamlining the conversation of what comes next. So that's step 1. So step 2, talking about the future state. What do you want to be when you grow up? Because if you look down at your current state and you look really hard, you'll probably find some things that are working well, and you'll probably find some things that you can't even remember why you did them the way you did. So that's the time to take what you learned in the current state and just think vision and strategy. How are we going to do these things? How are we going to communicate? And you always remember, you got to be thinking beyond the phone call, because we're talking about communication here. And that's going to take many, many forms. So I'm going to tell you the same thing my father told me. You can be anything you want when you grow up, but it better pay the bills. So while I can't tell you how you should be building your business in terms of a communication strategy, I can tell you some things that need to happen. If you're not doing it now, you need to plan for it. Plan for hybrid work at bare minimum. You might find yourself one day working fully remotely, but at the very least, build a communication strategy that plans for hybrid work. When we all went home to work from our couches, Smith Group took this survey, and they found out the second people got there, there's this whole pandemic going on. We got all kinds of crazy things going on, and people were already making decisions. businesses were already saying, 77% of them were already saying, this is something we're going to do to retract and to attract and retain good talent. 76% of workers were saying, yeah, man, if this isn't a part of work for the rest of my life, I'm out. So these are super important things. And you'll notice as they were asking all these people what the questions were, what are the biggest struggles working from home? Collaboration and communication, 20%. Loneliness, 20%. 18% not being able to unplug. Distractions at home, 12%. Every single one of those can be mitigated or solved with a good communication strategy and a good unified communication phone system. So important work to be done here. So that means presence. We're going to need to know how people are working, are they're available, are they not available? So integrating into Microsoft 365, integrating into Teams, syncing with your Outlook calendar, plan for those things if you're not doing them already. And how do we eliminate distractions? One of the easiest ways is noise cancellation. The first thing you notice when you start working from home is how loud your neighbor's dog is. So be thinking about these things, because you might have to invest in noise canceling headphones, whereas, used to be the single ear boom mic worked perfectly fine in the office. Nowadays, we're seeing Bluetooth, we're seeing active noise canceling systems, we're seeing stereo to block out more noise. This is making those investments are going to be really important to the quality of the experience of your remote workers. So definitely plan for that. And if you still have an office, plan for office upgrades. If you have internet, you might need low latency bandwidth. You might have to up that pipe to the next step. As while phone systems don't take a lot of bandwidth, remember, the voice doesn't slow down. So we need it to be fast. We need it to be low latency. And there's a difference between the two, between low latency and fast. You can get a gigabit connection to your office and still have 200 milliseconds of latency on that line. 200 is too much for a phone call. You will not have a good time. So just because the number is large doesn't necessarily mean it's fast from the phone system's perspective. Fast is latency when it comes to the phone system. 10 milliseconds, 12, 14 milliseconds. That's the kind of timing we're talking about for phone calls. Pretty easy to achieve if we do it right. But that's going to be a critical piece. That means your firewall and your router, if it's older, might not be able to pull off routing internet packages and packets that quickly. If it's slow to respond, if it's got a content filter on it, that might create some voice challenges. So at the very least, plan for some reprogramming of that firewall so that we're putting in priority rules, that we're putting in low latency strategies that will bypass some of the slower inspection filters on our voice calls. Again, secure SIP comes in to bridge that gap, so we're good. Your switches, make sure they're gigabit, even though, again, we're not talking about a lot of bandwidth here, but we are talking about low latency. We want a lot of breathing room on these networks. Make sure they deliver power over Ethernet. If they don't, now's the time to upgrade. And of course, your cabling. Got to be Cat 5e. It's got to be Cat 6. And as you're thinking through these things, how are we going to build this phone system? Are we going to use one cable, or are we going to use two cable? If we're doing one, we're doing a converged network. Voice and data traveling on the same wire has some considerations for it. If we're doing two, great, we're doing separate networks. We still have to do some traffic shaping. We still have to do some priority, but it's a little bit different than if we're doing it on a converged network. In either case, we might be talking about a VLAN, and while your IT guy is the one who's going to handle all that stuff, We're going to need switches that support it. We're going to need firewalls that support it, so that we're all good to go. So definitely plan for some expense if you have an office, bringing it up to this new gold standard. And plan for some home office upgrades too. You will find some employees that are using DSLs, or they're using satellite, or they have the lowest available package from Comcast or Orbitel, or Roadrunner. Might have to do some upgrades there if they want to work from home. So who's going to foot the bill for that? Is the company going to offer a stipend or a subsidy? Is that something the employee will have to? It's just the cost of doing business if you want to work from home, get a better internet connection. So understanding all how that plays out is going to be important. Wired connections versus wireless. Some phones do include wireless adapters. Of course, you're always going to get a better experience on the wire. Sometimes it's just not reasonable to run a wire across your whole house. So planning that out. If you're using physical phones in home offices, how are they going to get their power? You're likely not going to invest in a PoE switch to make it happen. So do you need power adapters? Do you need PoE injectors, power over Ethernet injectors? Plan for those kind of gadgets in the budget of pulling this thing off. And plan for security. Secure SIP, call reporting, call recording. Make sure you're strategizing on two-party consent. My personal preference, rather than try and keep track of what state everybody's calling from, I just do that as a default. I just assume two-party consent is the right thing to do, and that's how that gets done. So definitely plan for security along the way. And plan for Omni Channel. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So right now, chances are you're probably doing multi-channel. You've got your phone system, certainly. You've got email, certainly. You're doing some text messaging, whether you know it or not. And you might have that Facebook Messenger and stuff like that, but you don't have a centralized panel for all of this stuff to happen. So the person answering your Facebook messages might not be the person answering your text messages, might not be the person answering your email. And those various people probably have absolutely no visibility into the other things. So, you might have a phone call come in and say, yeah, I was chatting to somebody on Facebook and we were talking about changing some insurance coverage. Well, if you don't have any visibility into what that previous conversation was, you either have to track somebody down, or you have to ask the customer to repeat the whole process. That's where Omni Channel comes in and saves the day. Because with an Omni Channel system, you pick up the phone, you have access to the chats that were happening in Facebook Message, you have access to the chats that were happening from the website. If you're texting through the phone system, you have visibility into that. So it really drives for a better client experience. So pulling off Omni-Channel is a project unto itself. Not just bringing a phone system up to the modern age, but understanding the brand image, understanding the scripts, because the last thing you want to do is have to type out the exact same message every single time you initiate a chat from your website. So knowing the scripts, knowing how that all gets done, who's going to do it at what time, is it useful? You have too many requests. How do you convert those things? Do you want to do start to finish in chat, or do you want chat to be a mechanism to schedule a phone call for a review? Those are the types of things that we need to pull off. So that's your text messaging. Of course, with text messaging comes FCC registration. That's always a fun time. What are you going to integrate with? I mean, Facebook's the obvious one, but you've got so many different platforms out there, and knowing what you want to do and knowing what your phone system can and cannot pull off will be critical. Do you have a chat bot now? Are you using Podium? Does your website support it? What's that going to look like? You might even have to retool a bit of a website to make that happen. And are you using a CRM? It's a lot easier to change your phone system than it is a CRM. So it'll be important to know, is there an integration path there? This is where, I mentioned HubSpot and Freshdesk and Dynamics here, but if you're an insurance agency, something like Blue Butler comes to mind. How's that going to integrate with an agency management system? What does that look like? So very important to ask those questions and understand those, because every integration has some limitations. It's got some great features. It's got some not great features. So getting your expectations in line will be critical there, as we're asking for the world here when we integrate multi-systems that were built by different vendors across different time zones and all kinds of fun stuff. So, understanding what that's going to look like before you launch is important. And of course, video conferencing. When you're working from home, you really lose touch with seeing people's faces and what that looks like. So might want to plan for some digital backgrounds, might want to plan for some good quality webcams. The last thing you want is, a nice video shot of somebody's nose or something like that. So when you get into the world of video conferencing, it's a whole different mindset. So plan for that change, plan to explore that change. Some people are not comfortable being on video. Oddly enough, I happen to be one of them, but you learn through that. So step 3, you got to plan for all of this change. How on earth are we going to do it? Because it sounds like a lot. Well, step 1 is always about the money. Different phone systems, different communication systems, they all have different pricing models, but they usually come into 3 different buckets. Either you're paying per user, or you're paying for extension, or you're paying per concurrent call to the outside world, or you're paying in minute blocks. And these things are going to work differently in different environments. Typically, I see a 1-to-4 ratio between phone calls and human beings. 1 phone call, 4 human beings. That's kind of where I start when I pick these things apart. Of course, if you're running a call center or something like that, your ratio might be a little different. Might be 1-to-3, might be 1-to-2. But there are situations where just the nature of the client base, maybe they've moved on. Maybe they've moved on to webinars. Maybe they've moved on to email. Maybe they've moved on to something else. Sometimes you can see even a 1-to-20 ratio between phone calls and human beings. So if you've got a 1-to-20 ratio of calls to people, don't pay per user, pay per concurrent call. You'll save a ton of money doing it that way. Conversely, if you're like a heavy duty sales organization and 9 times out of 10 somebody's on the phone, pay per user. Much cheaper that way. So those are the things you'll need to consider, as you're looking at these contracts and looking at what you're going to sign up for once you've landed on something that makes sense from a technical perspective. Lease versus own, that's always a big conversation. Leasing usually has a lower upfront cost. Owning, you have to buy the equipment. Sometimes it's more flexible if you want to change things up. Sometimes it's actually less flexible, but owning is typically lower cost overall. So it's going to work differently for different businesses. Most of what I see these days is either lease or paying as a service. Maybe you purchase the handsets, the telephones themselves, but the rest of the system, make that somebody else's responsibility. That's what I tend to recommend. Because while it might have been 10 years since the last time you bought a phone system, it won't be another 10 years before you buy another. The change of what we do and how we do it is just way too fast. So doing phone systems and doing phone system change outs is going to be far more frequent than it ever has been, just so we can keep up with the Omni Channel. So, and the cost savings, every provider, every single one is going to claim they're going to save you money. And in some cases, that will be true. It might be 10%, it might be 30, might only be 1, but almost always there's some money to be saved, but never to the degree that they're going to sell it to you. I mean, that's just a fact. But I don't want you to think about this as a cost saving strategy. That's not why we're doing it. If it saves us money, great, but that's not what we're after. This has to be an investment in features. That has to be why we're doing this, is to make sure we have a good communication strategy that's going to serve our needs in the future. So knowing that it's an investment in features means using and learning the features. So that's going to be your next big hurdle, learning it. You're going to have to be intentional. Change is hard. Change is also necessary in this kind of situation. You know, answering a phone has kind of been the same thing for a number of years. Yeah, I remember growing up, we had a corded phone, and suddenly the cord got replaced, and now I had a cordless phone with an antenna. But answering the phone was pretty much the same thing. You know, I pick it up and I say hello. So all that's changing when you talk about communication strategy, when you talk about Omni Channel. So got to be intentional about this thing. We like to start with a train the trainer mentality. You know, we find people in the organization that get it. They love this stuff. Some people just get really excited about this kind of stuff. You know, they're going to become your evangelists. They're going to be your champions. For the people that are frustrated with the change, these are going to be the saviors that go, oh, it's really easy. Let me show you. So they're going to really bring everybody up to the challenge. So identifying those people, identifying the people that are really going to sink their teeth into this, and empowering those guys to be evangelists is going to be huge for you. So we recommend following up with some group training sessions. If you're doing physical phones, you don't want to have more than 3 people huddled around one phone. So if you're doing a group training session in your conference room and you have 5 phones available to you, maximum number of people in that room should be 15, preferably 10. If I can get 2 people looking at one phone, that's a lot easier. So group training, just to get everybody on the same page, so they're all hearing the same message and they have time to ask questions amongst themselves. Of course, that also lets you know as a trainer, lets me know as a trainer, you know, if everybody in the room has a puzzled look on their face and know I've said something wrong or I need to reiterate and make sure they understand it. So group training sessions are great for that. But also following up one-on-one is going to be critical, especially if you've got managers, people looking at your call analytics, receptionists, big. Give those folks all the time in the world because their job is challenging, but it's super critical that it gets pulled off well. So plan for some one-on-one, plan for some follow-up, plan for some management training. And of course, follow up with some cheat sheets and some videos. Nobody's going to read the user manual. You know, just give them the meat, give it to them raw. You know, give them some star codes, give them some quick help, something easy that they can print out and stick on a wall. That'll go a long way. So next steps, I kind of want to reiterate everything we've talked about here and what it's going to look like and how we're going to pull it off. So step 1, document the current state. What's your office structure? How do you answer the calls? How do you communicate with clients? Step 2, plan the future state. You know, look out, open your mind, think about what's possible. The future state, it has to be flexible. It's got to be secure. And you must be willing to engage clients everywhere because that's what they're going to want. And then step 3, explore solutions with an expert. Not all IT companies are communications experts. You might find this hard to believe, but IT guys aren't always good communicators. Just a fact. So not all companies are communication experts. However, all phone systems are computers. So that's a little weird for you. So really identifying who's going to partner with you on this journey, really, really critical. Who's going to be responsible? Who owns call quality? Who owns call flow? Is that going to be your IT company? Or is it going to be your phone company? That can be a challenging situation. So if you've got an IT company that does both, that's a serious advantage for you. Otherwise, you run the risk of finger pointing. Comcast isn't going to help you. I can tell you that much. So somebody's going to have to advocate. Is it going to be the phone system? Is it going to be the IT guys? So if you can get those two under one roof, you'll be in much better shape. And then step 4, make it happen, execute. There will be no better time to do it. There will be no worse time. So what I can tell you is that 10-year-old phone system, it ain't getting any younger. So, just get it done, rip the Band-Aid off. It will be change. It will be difficult, but it's going to be great. We do this all the time at KiteTech. We move people into teams, we move people into hosted phone systems, and nobody ever regrets having made the change. They're all very satisfied with the power of what they can do. Yeah, you can totally leave your desk now and still take your phone calls. Wow, it's amazing. So definitely make it happen. So I think we got some questions here. I'm going to answer some questions real quick. I see a question from Heidi. Can recorded calls get attached directly to client accounts in Applied Epic when you're on 3CX? The answer to that one, and not just unique to 3CX, but the answer to that one in most phone systems is going to be no. There aren't very good integrations between Epic and various other systems. I think that'll change in the future as Applied Systems moves to an open and well-documented API. But for now, you're going to need a system like Blue Butler to kind of bridge the gap. Blue Butler has done a very good job of delivering a very niche solution that works with many phone systems, 3CX being one of them. But if you've got an Avaya, if you've got Nextiva, if you've got 8x8, you should still be able to integrate Blue Butler into your workflows that will deliver recorded calls directly into Epic. If you're not using Applied Systems and you're using something like Vertifor's AMS 360, Lightspeed Voice is another company that's built some integrations into the agency management system. So definitely want to look at those guys. So I got another question here. Can I use existing hardware with a new phone system, or do I have to replace everything? Well, when we're thinking about this, we're not really talking about the PBX because we know we're changing out that guy. But if you have a virtual machine running an on-prem system, you can use the underlying hardware and build another virtual machine. But I suspect the most important thing to know here is the handsets, the endpoints. If you've got a handset, even if it's a Polycom or even if it's tied to a voice over IP system right now, it might not be compatible. Because while a lot of phone systems will use Polycom phones, sometimes their firmware is very specific. So I wouldn't count on the phones, the telephones, the endpoints being able to work with the new system. Always ask the question, but I would plan for an investment in hardware if you're using physical phones. Another question here. If I bought a phone system with just a few features to start, can I add additional features later? Sometimes, yes. The beauty of voice over IP phone systems is, for the most part, they're entirely software. So adding features, upgrading licenses, things of that nature, it's often very, very doable. You just buy the license and implement the tools. Some of them, you will buy a system that has far more features than you're going to use, and then you can turn them on later. And this is much better than what we used to buy. Back when we bought physical phone systems, if you needed to add more phones, the first thing you had to do was slide in some more physical ports. There was a lot of hardware, a lot of install. These days, the software can pretty much be scaled up or down based on need. And I got one final question here. Can you mix and match equipment for different employees' preferences? More often than not, that answer is yes. The big difference we see would be an office worker versus a receptionist. They're going to need fundamentally different telephones. You might want a receptionist phone that's got sidecars and a bunch of buttons so they can easily, press buttons and manipulate calls. They wear a headset all day, every day. So you might want to splurge and get them the best there is. Whereas, an office worker who only occasionally takes a phone call these days can probably get away with maybe no headset, or maybe Bluetooth or something like that. So yeah, you'll be able to pick and mix and match and get a phone system and get a phone handset and a headset based on the individual needs of the employees. At KiteTech here, for example, we tend to buy whatever the employee wants. We kind of go through that process, what's working well, what's not working well. And we find that oddly, a lot of folks, and I guess because they're gamers or something like that, they really prefer the double, the stereo headsets. So that's kind of been a common question when we go, do you want a single headset or do you want a double? Because I know enough to know that, that's a pretty common thing for us. Another question we always ask is, do you even want a physical handset or you just want to use your computer? I'm happy to go either way. Most of our employees, they're like, oh no, soft phone, USB headset, I'm good. So a lot of flexibility there.
That's awesome. And Jason, thank you so much for sharing with us today and going into some of the nitty gritty details, as well as the 30,000 foot view on what business phone systems can bring to the table. It's a great presentation. If you guys have additional questions,
it's a lot to know. That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's probably not all answered in what we covered today. So if you guys do have additional questions, we would love to get in touch with you and just have a conversation about what your needs are, how you use phone today, and maybe what that would look like in the future for your team. So feel free to contact us. There's a couple ways to do that on the screen here. Email us at engage@kitetechgroup.com. You can give us a phone call as well. Again, our team is definitely here to take a look at current state and see maybe if it's meeting your needs or not, what opportunities there are to improve your phone system. So just a reminder, thank you guys for attending. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a bit of a recording link and things like that, probably in the next few days. So be on the lookout for that. As well as, again, we'll be posting this to our website and to our YouTube channel to take a look at this down the line. If you take a moment before you exit today and just fill out the quick survey form that's there, we'd love to hear your feedback on the presentation, some of the topics maybe that you find interesting in the future, so we can tailor webinars around that and future content as well. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you, Jason, for the presentation. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. See ya.